What is going on YouTube and Diablo fans? My name's Andreas and as always welcome back to Mana and Motherboards. Today we are going to be answering the question that is on the tip of everyone's tongues, and that is if the Echoing Strike Warlock survived the recent patch notes, changes and nerfs in the patch 3.2 PTR that has just been released by Blizzard. And that is what we're going to be diving into today. And just to sort of kick that off, the Warlock was overpowered. I don't think many of us can deny that fact. And with the Warlock being overpowered, there was one skill in particular that was head and shoulders above the rest and ridiculously overtuned, and that was Echoing Strike. So I personally believe that some big changes needed to occur in order to bring balance back to the game, back to the Warlock as a class, and many people really enjoyed the overpowered nature of the Warlock, but ultimately I think it wasn't healthy for the state of Diablo 2 in general. So kicking off here, we have a pre-built character that Blizzard provided in the PTR. You have a couple online pre-built characters, and the first thing that they did wrong, in my opinion, just in terms of the PTR, was give you a really weird set of gear in relation to the changes that occurred to Echoing Strike and the Warlock. So they gave you an Enigma, a crazy 220 diadem with all resist strength and a bear rune to get that damage reduction, so it was quite an insane diadem. And they gave you a High Lords, a 29 FCR Arsdal Mephistos, Trangul, Stone of Jordan, a FCR ring, Arachnid Mesh, Gore Riders, and probably the weirdest item of the bunch was this Thundermaw Fortitude. So one of the first changes that they made, or bug fix that they made to Echoing Strike, is that it now uses durability. So within the first half an hour of playing the PTR with the pre-built Echoing Strike build, is your main weapon just breaking, and then you have to immediately seek out and find another weapon. So very quickly this Thundermaw just became a piece of trash, and then I had to farm using whatever weapon I could randomly find in order to build an Insight. So I just thought an Insight is a great sort of entry to mid-level weapon for the Echoing Strike build, regardless of whether it's the current patch 3.2 changes or the season 13 release sort of spec. And I built myself an Insight. I luckily found a Colossus Vulge and luckily did the cube recipe and got 4 sockets and found the ruins to make an Insight. I also made my Merc, I first made myself an Insight just in a war scythe and used that for a bit. And maybe this was intentional by Blizzard, because by using this Fortitude, having it break, and then just finding whatever other weapons you could find, it was quite an interesting test where Echoing Strike in the Season 13 release form could use absolutely any weapon and annihilate hull content. And this was very much not the case with the changes that have been made to Echoing Strike, especially in terms of the reduction in damage and the nerfs towards its damage. So, using, for instance, like this Warsight Insight, if you had the other gear that this sort of pre-built character came from, and you were in the Season 13 release form of Echoing Strike, you would absolutely annihilate everything, and this wasn't the case. I mean, even with this Insight, you are not doing a whole ton of damage. You may be doing 5k damage at most, and really taking a long time to kill anything. So that was the first thing to note. It was a really weird setup. You have all these crazy lifer skillers, and you had a Torch and Annie, all these crazy small charms, this crazy setup, and it just didn't work. firstly, one of the biggest things besides the weapon that they gave you was also the rings didn't provide any leech, and there's no leech in terms of mana or life leech on your gear at all. And basically Echoing Strike can't function without leech. Even with Insight, it is way too mana intensive and way too mana hungry that you need a form of mana leech. So I quickly gambled a 2 to mana stolen per hit ring and a 4 to life steal ring, and I needed to use these instead of the Stone of Jordan and the faster cast rate ring in order just for the build to function. So that was a big thing. The resistances were low overall, so you did feel quite squishy. It was almost just damage based with nothing in regards to sustain and nothing in regards to resource management, and you just couldn't even really play the build. And then when you did play the build, within 20 minutes you lost your weapon. So it was interesting. You felt like they gave you a really overpowered, I mean, they even gave you a renewed bone break Sundered Charm. It felt like they gave you overpowered gear until you actually started playing with the reworked Warlock and Echoing Strike build, and then realize it falls completely flat. So it's almost like they started you off with the expectation that Echoing Strike is completely trash now. And that was a sort of interesting introduction into the PTR, and I was feeling a bit sort of pessimistic about all the changes that had happened and everything that was going on. And yeah, it was just a weird feeling. And after playing with it for a couple hours yesterday and doing a live stream, you can check that out on the channel, I sort of left not really knowing what I felt about Echoing Strike. So today I decided to start using Hero Editor for my testing a bit more, just to get a better feel of what the Warlock is actually like, with some sort of pre-thought into what goes into the gear, the skills, the build, and everything like that. So the first thing I did was get some life leech and some mana leech on the build. So that is an essential aspect of Echoing Strike working, is just having your leech and sustain and resource management under control. So using an Insight in conjunction with some life leech and some mana leech, I would recommend about 5% of either, is a big sort of necessity as a starting point for this build. Then I think reaching your FCR breakpoints is also very important. And it was weird again with the starter gear that they gave with the pre-built character. They gave you 124% faster cast rate on the pre-built gear, which means you were one faster cast rate percentage off of the max frames or max breakpoint. So basically they gave you, what is it, 49 faster cast rate that was unnecessary because it didn't use that 1% extra to make the next breakpoint. So you were basically on the 75% breakpoint, not the 125, and you were just shy of it. So that was a weird choice. So what I did was get some leech on the character. I also got my FCR in check. I got my resistances reasonable, nothing spectacular, fancy or great, just above the sort of 0% that was given to us in the PTR, and just sort of played around with the gear a bit more and got a weapon that isn't Eth and won't break within the first 20 minutes. So let's go over the build a bit here quickly and what I decided to do for this character. So let's start off with the skills, and I put 1 point into Sigil Lethargy just so that we can get that minus to enemy defense, so that we can actually hit with Echoing Strike, because it now requires a roll to hit or a hit check in order to hit monsters, which means it uses attack rating. So we put 1 point into Sigil Lethargy. We then maxed out Echoing Strike and its synergies, and we put 1 point into Hex Purge, Again, this is to gain attack rating to help us hit our enemies. So max out Echoing Strike and its synergies, and then 1 into Hex Purge. Then the demon tree now has changed substantially from what it was, where you can't just put 1 point into everything and everything works like a 1 point wonder. You need to be a bit more mindful, a bit more thoughtful, and you need to sort of pre-think what your build is going to need at that stage of the game that you are. So I put 1 point into all the skills so that I could get Consume and that I could use Bind Demon. I then put 5 base points into Demonic Mastery so that I could have a maximum of 2 demons, so that I could both consume a demon and have a bound demon. And then I put the rest of my skill points into Bind Demon until I could get a base of 15, which meant I could then bind a unique monster, a unique demon. And I think this is quite a big requirement for Echoing Strike to function at its best, is having 15 points into Bind Demon. And then the rest of my skill points I started putting into Blood Oath just to get more life and resist on my Bound Demon, as well as that synergy between our damage being shared with our character and the Bind Demon. So that is my build in terms of the skills I used. Then for my stat points, I put enough into strength for my gear, enough into dex for my gear, and the rest into vitality, sort of your cookie cutter build in terms of stat points. That's what I did. If you see the current sort of configuration and setup that we have here, we have 5 lifesteal, 6 mana steal, we are at 135% faster cast rate. We could have some more faster hit recovery, that would be very, very beneficial, but this is just sort of the base level that we are at. We also have 46% deadly strike, which helps us substantially. And I also got myself a Merc. I made a cheap obedience for the Merc just to sort of showcase what like an entry level Merc for the Echoing Strike Warlock would be. I put on a Treachery and a Tull's mask, just a very simple setup on a Might Mercenary on the Merc there. Then in terms of the Bound Demon that I chose, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but definitely by far, in my opinion, the best affixes for your Bound Demon to have are the Cursed affix with Holy Freeze, because on its own, the Cursed affix at its now 5% proc rate really takes a long time to apply any sort of useful amount of procs of that amp damage curse. So to get the most out of it, you really need it in conjunction with that Holy Freeze aura, which helps your Bound Demon to proc that curse a lot more often. And that's just sort of finding a demon now that has cursed and then hoping it gets that Holy Freeze aura from your soft skill point Bind Demon, where as you can see there it says Bound Demons gain Aura Enchanted. That is when you have at least 20 soft points into it and a base of 15 in order to get a unique monster or unique demon bound. So that's the sort of setup and build that I am running at the moment. And then in terms of gear, we still have a Trangs, and I'm trying to go for what I would say is like a sort of entry level end game setup, or an end game setup but not fully optimized, not fully best in slot gear, just sort of what you would have once you have got yourself an Enigma and a couple other items. That could be considered very end game for some. I would consider this to be sort of entry end game in my opinion. So Enigma is just best in slot. The mobility that it provides and all the other stats, we're just using a Hull Wardens with a Protector Stone in there to get that all skills, to get the faster cast rate frames. We're using a High Lords for the skill and the Deadly Strike, the Arsdal Mephistos so that we can use a two-handed weapon with that new change to the Warlock. I think two-handed weapons are quite important now because of the damage nerfs. Using a single-handed weapon doesn't quite get you to that damage level that I think is comfortable. I think if you were using like a Last Wish or some crazy single-handed or one-handed weapon, you would be doing a lot better, but sort of for an entry-level endgame build, definitely using a tome or a book so that you can use a two-hander is important. We've got our insight in a cryptic axe here just to get us going. I think there's a lot of other options, and I'm busy with a lot of other testing to see what are the optimal sort of weapon choices for the Echoing Strike Warlock. And this is just a basic setup to show you the basic strength of the Warlock in its current state. So we've got an Arachnid Mesh Bolt, we've got a Bull Kathos Wedding Band for the lifesteal, just a faster cast rate Mana Leech Ring there, we've got our Gore Riders, then we have some All Resist Small Charms, a Torch and an Annie, just 15-15, just to sort of illustrate a mid-rolled Annies, and then we just got 3 plain Skillers, so not those crazy lifer Skillers that were provided to us in the PTR. We just have our sort of simple setup. We don't have call to arms or anything like that. Like I said, this is just to sort of replicate a simple setup. So that is sort of the choices that I made in terms of just optimizing this build a bit better than I think what Blizzard provided in the PTR. I don't think they were trying to provide you with the perfect setup, but I think they were kind of trying to mislead you on purpose. That is my personal opinion. So if I'm just going to set players to 1 here. So if we look on players 1, this is how our Warlock is going to sort of play at the moment. So we're going to summon our Goatman and then get rolling here. So you're going to want to cast your Sigil Lethargy in order to hit monsters as best as possible. And if we just see here, for some reason on this PTR single player, the AI seems a bit weird for your Merc and your Demon, but this is sort of your player's 1 kill speed, and I think this is quite a fair kill speed for the gear that has been put together for this. I don't think you are sort of like one-shotting like you were before, and I mean you're definitely not, but it's a fair kill speed. I think, like for instance, that was a physical immune champion just like this, and you're not doing that easy immunity breaks like you were before, and you're waiting for your bound demon to proc that amp damage in order to take out immunes. You are using your Hex Purge in order to help with immunes, and in general it's just a lot more challenging than the build was before. It just feels realistic now compared to how it felt before, which was way too overpowered. So this is your, like I mentioned, players 1 sort of clear speed, your players 1 difficulty, your players 1 showcase, and I think this is feeling for players 1 in quite a good spot. I mean, compared to the gear that was provided in the PTR, this is leagues better. I mean, we're only doing, if you can see here, this is with a Might Mercenary, we are only doing around almost 8k damage, and that is where I think that the skill sort of, or the skill damage should be for this gear level. I think you would be able to get mid to high teens, maybe 20,000 damage if you do have fully optimized gear, but for the gear that you have at the moment, I think this is the sweet spot or the right spot that it should be. So what we can do here quickly is I'll actually just exit and rejoin the game, and then I will terrorize Act 4 and we can just give that a quick try. Let's just get our Deep Wallstone Shard here, terrorize Act 4. Just gonna buff up again. We're just gonna put on our Hex Purge, we're gonna put on our Psychic Ward, summoned our goat man and gonna consume him. And just take note of how often our bound demon is actually cursing the mobs. It really, even with Holy Freeze, takes quite a while for your amp damage to proc. And I think, you know, combined with Holy Freeze and the current 5% proc chance, it sort of gives you a much more realistic play style, play feeling than it used to be, where it was just instant proc of amp damage and you were just dealing double damage, if not more, triple, quadruple damage immediately. I think that was one of the most broken mechanics and aspects of the Echoing Strike build at the current sort of state in Season 13 and its launch, and current state before the PTR. So, as you can see, this is a terrorized 88 zone, and we are doing what I think is a fair speed through it. I think you're in that sort of A+ to close to S tier speed for the gear that we do have. What I'm going to do quickly now is put it onto Players 8 so we can just have a bit of a illustration demonstration of what Players 8 feels like. And I think this is where there's going to be quite a disparity from the initial launch and power level of this build. So there, as you can see, we had a Herald spawn, so we're just going to get up our... Oh, we lost our Merc there, unfortunately. So look at the life of these, of the retinue from the Herald here. They have a ton of life, and you have to be very careful of your bound demon. You don't want to lose that bound demon that took you so long to capture or to bind, because that's just how the mechanic works now, and how the skill of bind demon works. It's really difficult to bind a demon, find the right demon that you want, and get all the affixes and all of that you want. So this is a tier 1 Herald on P8, and you can just see, compared to how it was before, the sort of damage that you are doing. And this is our sort of little test with suboptimal just entry endgame gear, and I'll quickly make a couple changes and then show you what that's like. So yes, we were missing our Merc, and we'll quickly go and get our Merc just to help out with the situation, but I think that gives you sort of quite a accurate representation of the power levels right now. So we just buffed up again, and again this is terrorized Players 8, and I think the character is doing pretty well. I think a big point of the game is that it is supposed to be a game of min-maxing. It is supposed to be a game of clever choices, and I think this is sort of the power level that your hero or your character should be at with this gear, at this difficulty setting and level. I don't think you should be one-shotting mobs on Players 8 by yourself, even with endgame gear. I think that is sort of, once you've reached the highest possible sort of echelon of character and build, you should still not be one-shotting everything in Players 8 and terrorized on top of that. I think that was a very unrealistic sort of standard that felt like it was set with the Mosaic Assassin and the Echoing Strike Warlock. I think it was just way too overpowered, and as you see, we've got a Herald here as well. Probably going to kill my Merc again, but we'll try keep him alive. But this is sort of the difficulty that I think is fair, and I mean, I try to think of other characters, even a Hamadin, or, you know, which is basically the strongest character in Diablo 2 Resurrected, or Nova Sorceress, and it's not going to be doing a whole lot better than what this Echoing Strike character is doing at this current state of gear and current state of power. So I do think that we are sort of sitting in a good spot right now. I think it does fair damage. I think it's where it should be for the gear level at this sort of difficulty level. They have changed heralds, and heralds now have a ton more life, and they have quite a bit more damage as well. So I think this is where we should be sitting, sort of one-shotting heralds and not knowing they were even there. Shouldn't have been the intention, and shouldn't have been the state that the game was in recently. I think that was a bit far-fetched, a bit overtuned, and this is what we should be looking at now. I think 4 players 8, this build is still doing quite fantastically well. And just again to talk about the Bind Demon, I think that I'm very happy with where they've tuned it now. It's so much better just being able to care about your demon a bit more and not just have a 1-point wonder tank that can survive absolutely anything, doesn't matter what demon you bound. And it was just way too overtuned, and now it really takes a bit of time to bind a good demon. I mean, even just the actual binding itself can take a little while, and it's sort of a tricky process and a lengthy process that makes you more attached and more sort of serious about keeping your demon alive. And I think it's just a greater place to be than what we used to have in the Season 13 and launch. And I definitely think that Cursed with Holy Freeze is sort of a necessity if you want to... Oh, my weapon's broken there. If you want to... Sorry, let me just reset what I was saying there. I think that Cursed and Holy Freeze is what you want to aim for as an end build setup for the Echoing Strike Warlock. I don't think that Cursed on its own is strong enough. I think it procs way too slowly, and if you really want to make the most of your build, having Curse go off as often as possible really makes a massive difference to the build here. So very quickly I'm going to go back to town, and we're just going to change stuff up a bit. So we were at that 125 faster cast rate right now, and what I'm going to do is switch my insight over to my Merc. Obedience is actually a fair enough weapon for this character as well, just as a side note. But I'm going to put on what I think is the next tier up in terms of damage. So what we're going to do is put that insight on our Merc. We're going to use a Breath of the Dying in a War Pike, so that also gives us our extra leech. So what we can do is take off these rings and put on a couple Stones of Jordan also to get a bigger mana pool. And what else do we have? Let's see what our faster cast rate is sitting at. So we are at 90 faster cast rate, which means we could lose 10. Nothing really major. What we'll do is, yeah, I think we'll keep it at what this is right now. So we have a bit more mana and we have a bit more damage. So we were at almost 8k damage before. So now we're just going to buff again and see where we are sitting once our Might Aura kicks in. And I think we're doing a little bit more damage with Breath of the Dying. I think it's a very good option for weapon. And come on, Might, kick in there. And I think Breath of the Dying is a nice option. As you can see, we go to about 12k damage, so about a 50% damage increase by using Breath of the Dying and switching over to Insight on our Mercenary. And as you can see, with the leech that we have, our mana and life is staying very much sustained. It's where we want it to be. There our Merc died, so our sustain's not going to be quite as good, but it should still be enough. I should have bound that what is the Infector of Souls, just to show you what a not Holy Freeze version of this build would be. But let's just kill Diablo quickly. I'll actually go and get my Merc just to sort of replicate a realistic terrorize Diablo players 8 sort of kill speed. And I think we're going to sort of slowly wrap up the video here. I think that we are sitting in a good place with Echoing Strike right now. I think that the changes were substantial, but they weren't unnecessary, and they have really tuned back what was a disgustingly overpowered build into the realms of reality, and I would put it at that A plus S tier sort of standing, and it's such a more realistic place to be. I think that with some optimization, this build could really get up to Hammerden and Nova Sorceress sort of power levels, which is all you could ever hope or wish for in Diablo 2. We didn't need to be killing monsters 10 times over like we were with the previous state of the Echoing Strike Warlock, and I think where we are now is just such a better place. We also have so many more options. We can, you know, throw on a Shaco instead of our Hull Wardens, and we can maybe use an Obsession instead. We can use Ariox is also a very good option. We can put on a Phoenix Shield, and oh, I just need to change this quickly. So what you can do is add a Phoenix Shield and a Death Axe, or Breath of the Dying Axe, and a Phoenix Shield that also does incredibly well. You could even add on a Mars there to that. Let's just check what our sorry, I'm sort of rambling a bit and I'm getting off on a tangent here, but there are many other options of gear that you can add to this build and sort of optimize further. I hope that this gave you sort of a look at the changes of the Warlock currently and where we are, and I think that we won't be seeing a major shift in the current power level of the Warlock. I think that maybe it could have a tiny bit more damage, but overall the build is in a good spot in my opinion. I think that you can optimize it a lot further than what I have, and I will continue to do a lot more testing to get more close to your best in slot or your optimized version of this build. I mean, like I mentioned, we don't have a CTA on this, we don't have a fully optimized Merc. There is still a lot of damage on the table. So that's where we're going to end off this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope this gave you some insight into a sort of entry end game Echoing Strike Warlock in the current meta, in the patch 3.2 PTR, and we've added a new member section to our channel. If you like this sort of content and would like to support the channel further and get early access to member-only content, member-only live streams, member-only gameplay, all of that sort of stuff, consider becoming a member. Even if you wouldn't like to become a member and you do enjoy the content, please consider subscribing, and we will catch you again very soon for some more Mana and Motherboards. Cheers.